You're listening to the Successors podcast with Kara Oosterhuis on RealAgriculture.com.
Okay, folks, it is time for episode 8 of the Successors podcast. I am your host, Kara Oosterhuis. I can't believe we are already at episode 8. I mean, I know they often say I don't like to focus on failure, but when it comes to podcasts, they say they often fizzle out before episode 10. So work with me as we try to make it to that point. For sure. Anyways, we are now in the new year. It is the first podcast of the new year, so thank you very much for tuning in. I don't know about you guys, the weather, as you know, I'm based in southern Alberta, and the weather has been very wishy-washy. It seems like it's anywhere from minus 35 to plus 10 to back to minus 35, or the wind's blowing, and it's just a little bit of a whirlwind. It sometimes makes going outside, getting that fresh air quite difficult. I mean, unless, of course, you have livestock, then I know the pain of going outside all bundled up, but hey, it makes it worth it for sure. Anyways, where I'm going with this is it's that time of year where it can be kind of difficult. Our minds can spin. I mean, just look at the news, look at what's going on everywhere. It's a lot for the brain to take in, and it's very difficult to sometimes process and sometimes even realize what's going on with ourselves. So for this month's episode of the Successors podcast, I really wanted to bring in somebody who tackles mental health and illness. Now, my guest here today for episode 8 is Kristen Kelderman, and she studies psychology and neuroscience at King's College in London, not London, Ontario, but London, England. She does it remotely, and she does it all from her place in Carrying Place, Ontario. Now, Kristen, you might know from the marketing and communications space in agriculture, as that's where she was previously, grew up on a farm, is still involved with ag, but has recently made the decision to kind of make a pivot in her life and go back to school. So anyways, before I keep rambling on for too long, I'm going to bring in Kristen. Kristen, how is it going today?
Hi, Kara. It's, it is sunny and it is cold out, but we are just making the most of this beautiful winter day here in Ontario.
Absolutely. So hearing psychology, neuroscience, people might be kind of thinking, okay, what on earth are you doing on the Successors podcast? Talk a bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess first and foremost, I grew up on a dairy farm. That's kind of where my story starts. My parents milked cows for many, many years, and recently, just last year in 2021, they decided to retire. So a little bit of a transition for us, but the farm was always very central in my life growing up. Everything from doing chores to how we were raised, our culture in agriculture, and that kind of took me through into my career, where I found myself going to the University of Guelph, first of all, to study agricultural science for 4 years, and then working in industry for 10 years. The past 10 years has been just a bit of a whirlwind, mostly working in marketing and communications, working side by side with farmers, and really loving what I was doing and enjoying kind of that agriculture career that I set out to kind of pursue. Myself, I am, I guess I'm a second or third generation dairy farmer here in Ontario. My husband also grew up on a farm not too far away. We met in school. It's, kind of the classic meet up in love story from university. And we've currently settled in a small rural community closer back to home now, where we enjoy life with our little golden retriever, and we are expecting 2 twins on the way. So life is both exciting and lots to plan for at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very exciting. Congratulations. I look forward to seeing some little babies as we move forward.
You betcha. It was definitely a bit of a surprise for us, but something that, as a farm kid, you just sort of learn to roll with the punches and go what life gives you. And so we're excited to see where this takes us, but definitely we'll have a lot on our plate, but that's all right.
So speaking of planning and rolling with the punches, did you ever plan on going back to the farm? Was that ever in your books, or did you always know you wanted to be a part of industry?
Yeah, that is a really good question, because I think it's something that I struggled with a lot when I was younger and kind of like trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do with this, life of mine? And having that firsthand experience on the farm, I knew I loved agriculture. I really loved farming. But kind of, only seeing that one dimension, like, what my parents did every day for 30 plus years, that was, all I was really exposed to. So I didn't really know beyond those borders what agriculture was full of until I started doing things like 4-H and seeing other farmers, at industry events and meetings and stuff. And that kind of like opened up the door to say like, hey, I don't have to be like a primary producer to work in this industry. And so that kind of led me to the University of Guelph, and which was just kind of a whole other world for me. 3 hours from home for the first time, being away from my parents. I still remember that first night of calling my mom, crying on the phone that I absolutely hated it and wanted to come home. But thankfully, my attitude changed quite quickly after that, because our industry is just so vast and amazing that you can really do anything that you want to. You can be an accountant or an agronomist or a farmer or work in marketing and communications, like use that creative side of your brain or that analytical side. So that was really kind of something I wasn't exposed to at a young age. And so through those kind of formative university years, I was trying to, see what stuck, see what I liked. I worked a little bit in research. I worked a little bit in marketing and communications. There was always kind of that pull back to the farm to say like, I'm one of 5 kids in my family, and I'm the oldest. And it was a conversation that my husband and I did have, but we both quickly realized that we thought the value that we could bring to the industry was greater than being a primary producer and going back to the farm. So it was always kind of there, like sort of blurry in the background, but we hadn't really figured it out. But once I started working with farmers and getting to see kind of that greater, bigger side of agriculture, I knew that's kind of where my heart was being pulled towards and kind of where my talents were best suited as well.
Well, and there's something about agriculture, like you said, that there's any job you can have that somehow relates back to agriculture. I mean, I get this all the time, even in ag communications. I tell, people outside of agriculture, and they're like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, well, essentially I'm an agriculture reporter. And they're like, that's a job? Like, what are you doing? So it's, they're all important, and everyone kind of brings value to the industry in different ways. So that's cool. You were kind of able to see that maybe primary production wasn't where you wanted to be, but that there's other things out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just like you said, every piece is important, right? And we all kind of work together as a team, I think. Like people are the heart of our industry. And I think that's something that we often maybe lose track of a little bit in the day-to-day, because we're so focused on, production and business and animal health and crop health and climate and all of those big pieces. But at the end of the day, farming is about people, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason too why I wanted to launch this podcast was, of course, there's the informative side, but I love the people and the stories. And I know I've been told my whole career in ag, people have always said it's a small industry. And you know what? It as big as this industry is, it really is, because the people are so connected.
Right. Absolutely. That connection is, I think, what's kind of the heart and the passion that drives a lot of the day-to-day, the excitement for our industry. And that connection really kind of creates a really great sense of community that gives you a little bit of, something to be proud to be part of. Because I know, being on a farm can be quite isolating. You're working day in and day out, a lot of times by yourself or with your family or with the same people you have for many, many years. And kind of that monotony can be a little bit, kind of wear you down a little bit. So kind of thinking a little bit more of that big picture, that community that sort of keeps us going maybe a little bit.
Yeah, completely. So you took another pivot in your life. You said you did all sorts of ag-relating school, but now you are getting your master's in psychology. Talk about what drove you there.
Mm-hmm. Well, a little bit of a semi-midlife crisis. But in full truth, I really did love working in marketing and communications. I love that creative side of my brain. And working with the people in agriculture, but something was missing, and I could feel it kind of as I was going through kind of just my day to day and what I was doing with work. And then the pandemic hit, and things kind of got tipped up on its side, and work was different, and what we were able to do was different, and I was kind of feeling that pull for something more, a little bit stronger in that time. And so I took that as a little bit of opportunity for some self-reflection and to say, what does this mean? What is this feeling telling me? And kind of connecting in with my inner self and what I want in life. And so that kind of came about to lead me to going back to school, which is always something I think deep down I knew I wanted to do, but I didn't know what. I didn't know, if I wanted to get my MBA or if I wanted to do something with animal science and, kind of more of those traditional routes of a master's. And so through kind of a bit of this soul searching and being able to slow down a little bit through the pandemic, sort of my personal self journey and this yearning for something bigger with my career connected together. And that's sort of where I found mental health. And that's, something that we've heard a little bit more in the last 5 to 10 years around agriculture, and being talked about in communications and, podcasts and written about in magazines and stuff like that. But it hasn't really, I don't think, scratched the surface a little, beyond those sort of levels. And so I was really kind of finding my own journey in mental health. And I said, you know what, surely I can't be the only one here. This is a huge part of our lives. And, we all live with our own mental health every day. And farmers certainly have lots of challenges and whatnot. And so, that kind of, all of those pieces together sort of led me down this path of searching out, what options are there for further schooling for mental health, and how can I use that to bring it back to the industry that I know I'm passionate about and the people that I want to work with and help. And so that kind of led me to studying at King's College. I'll be wrapping up my master's at the end of this year, 2022. So I've got a good amount of studying under my belt with a little bit more to go. It was just kind of really a pivot, but it was also a pivot with purpose, I guess, too, because I know afterwards sort of, what I want to do and how I want to utilize this information for our industry and to help our people. I'm super, super passionate about it and really excited to kind of see, where this whole mental health piece fits within agriculture, because it touches everyone. It touches, not only the farmer, but all of our support people, our people who work in communications. We're all kind of talking, or we're all kind of dealing with the same thing, but nobody's really talking about it too much to each other. So trying to make those connections, I think will be really important going forward. And then also finding real practical resources and tools about how we can help people, with their mental health, as well as potentially, more seriously mental illness issues too.
Talk about that original decision. As you said, it was a pivot with purpose, but I mean, you make it sound pretty easy, and I'm sure it was not an easy decision at the time to pick up and kind of quote unquote start over. What kind of drove you to realize that's what you needed to do?
Yeah, if I think back to it, you're right. It was not an easy decision to make. My husband at the time, he had just taken on a new role with a new company that was going to potentially take us down to Chicago in the U.S. And so we had that piece of our life that was kind of changing. And I wasn't sure where I fit into that quite yet. And yeah, I was kind of feeling this internal pull about am I in the right place? Kind of questioning my own future in that way too. And I can remember there was a lot of, long conversations, the two of us just kind of talking it through, because we were in it together. I wanted to make this decision together with him, not just, go off on a whim. And I wanted it to really be something that I stuck with too, right? I didn't want it to just be oh, this is just, something I'm going to try. And then if I don't like it, I'm going to try something else. I was committed to making a change, but I wanted to make the right change too. So there were a couple other programs that I had looked into around mental health, a couple that were here in Canada, some that were in the US, and really just kind of self-evaluating them at the same time as I was internally self-evaluating. And then I had a couple of mentors too, who kind of came into that picture at the same time. Someone who works in farm mental health. She was a really great resource for me. Her name is Deb, and she's really championed a lot of this mental health work in agriculture, as well as bringing some of those practical resources to farmers locally here in Ontario, as well as it's being picked up across Canada now, which is incredible. So having some really deep conversations with her, leaning on her for support and guidance. And then also, some of my just family and friends saying, I think this is what it's kind of floating the idea by them just to kind of, gut check sort of to make sure I wasn't totally, out in left field here. And the responses that I got were very positive and very supportive, and just kind of reaffirmed that direction that I was heading in. And so, there was definitely some sleepless nights there, and there was some list making about okay, pros and cons, and evaluating different schooling options and whatnot, as well as potentially uprooting and moving our life to Chicago. So now that I think back to it, I was holy man, I can't believe we lived through that. But at the end of the day, I think it was the right decision for me, and something that I'm still extremely passionate about, and something that still kind of every morning when I get up to do virtual school, which was something that I was definitely not used to or exposed to in my undergrad program. I think I had one or two distance ed learning, which they were nothing like what it is today. Having to have that self-drive and that self-passion to do that every day. I'm thankful that it's still that fire is still burning very hot within me. And so it's definitely helped keep me motivated and keep me going forward today.
Well, and I know you can't see me over here, but I am smiling ear to ear when you're talking about the fire burning inside of you, because I think that is just absolutely fantastic. If we can all in some way, shape, or form be passionate about what we're doing, that is just incredible. So you kind of alluded to how the conversation surrounding mental health is really starting to grow. You're hearing a lot more about it. However, we're not really scratching the surface. It's like people want to talk about mental health, but they don't really talk about mental health, if that makes sense. How are you working to kind of change that narrative?
Yeah, I think this is probably, one of our biggest hurdles to kind of overcome. And no surprise that mental health comes with a lot of stigma, right? Like we've all had experiences with people who've had challenges in their lives with mental health. And, it's kind of almost like that whispered about conversation in the corner at the farm meetings. You'd be like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? Or did you know that this is happening in our community or whatever? And it's a little bit frustrating in a sense, but it's also very, it's kind of like I can understand it from a psychology perspective because mental health is something, it's hard to grasp, right? Like we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't really, it's difficult to measure, and it's difficult to note progression as well, because it's more of that like internalness of our being and of our health versus things like physical health. You break your arm, you go to the doctor and you get it put in a cast or a splint or whatever. Like those things are very physical, and we can see it and we can, deal with that. Whereas mental health is kind of this elusive sort of area that's been painted with a bit of a brush of, mental health and mental illness are often combined together, which in reality, they're two very different things. And I think that kind of feeds into a bit of this hesitation about why we are kind of talking about it, but we're not really, or some people are talking about it a lot and other people are just kind of like standing back and like waiting to see what happens there. And yeah, like this idea around talking about everybody has mental health, right? Like at the end of the day, we are all human beings and we all have struggles and we all have successes, and mental health is really about how we function and how we live in our day-to-day and how we deal with things like stress and challenges that come at us. And, it's kind of that wholeness around how you function in life and how you deal with stress. And mental illness is when that stress becomes too much that you actually can't function anymore. And so that's when you need, probably extra help, whether that be from a medication standpoint or from a professional standpoint, like a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And that's a very different realm than what we're talking about, like the day-to-day mental health that we all deal with. We all have emotions and feelings, and those kind of all come into this mental health picture. And that's hard for people, any normal person to talk about their feelings and how they're dealing with stress and whatnot. And then layer on top of that some of our cultural norms around how we were raised and how our industry is run, and how male dominated it's been up until more recently. That kind of layers on an extra hardness that we have to sort of chip away at and get through. But I can honestly say that in my experience, and like probably the last 5 years about really talking about mental health, to people in person or online or sharing parts of my story, everybody is very open and receptive mostly to this conversation, because we all experience it. And I think that's something that's so important, is to just start to normalize the conversation around, we work in this industry and it's amazing, but sometimes it sucks. And sometimes we can't deal, we can't control everything, right? Like we can't control the weather. We can't control drought conditions and too much rain and animals getting sick. And that starts to eat away at our day-to-day coping mechanisms. And that's okay. That's normal. That happens with everyone, right? And it's about how do we develop healthy ways of dealing with that in our day-to-day that we can really start to kind of champion more wellness practices within mental health and how you deal with stress in a healthy way, instead of, getting angry and bottled up and not talking about things. And then, a couple days later, somebody says something to you off the cuff and you completely lose your cool on them. And it's like, we've all been there, and it happens, and that's normal too. But how can we kind of be a little bit more proactive and recognize some of those signs within ourselves and have healthy outlets to then be able to deal with that?
Well, and like you said, mental health and mental illness are something that it is really hard to grasp. I feel like I've written articles before of my own experiences, and I sometimes I get a lot of positive feedback of being like, yeah, I get you. And then I'll get some responses, which I appreciate these just as much, but they go, okay, can you explain to me why you're feeling this way? Or there'll be people in my life that will be like, I just don't get it. Like, why can't you just stop crying, And you're like, well, there's a lot going on. And I think when we look at agriculture specifically, this is why we need even more resources specific to ag, because not only are you trying to get the level of mental illness and mental health and all of that, but you're trying to get agriculture, right? Like, people don't understand a lot of these variables going on that we can't control.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny you say, the people that don't get it. And, I certainly have run into a lot of them in my conversations too. And that's okay. It's good to ask questions. Like, if you don't understand or you're not comfortable with this whole mental health piece or feelings or emotions, or, ask those questions and have those conversations. Those people, we need to support that just as much as the people who are championing it. And, even people like my dad, I still have conversations to this day that he's just like, so tell me again why you're studying this. And that's okay. That's okay to be skeptical. It's okay to not be all in, because we need that to challenge us, and we need that to continue to, because we've got, all kinds of different personalities and people that work in agriculture. And we don't want to just say okay, let's all, get really touchy-feely with our emotions and talk about that. That probably won't work for everyone, right? I have this conversation with my husband too, and he's a very introspective, very, he thinks a lot, and he's very purposeful with his intentions and everything. And I'm a very different personality than him. And I'm kind of all over the map and whatnot. And so he's able to do some of those more personal development type things for himself to manage his own mental health. And myself, I found a lot of value in going and seeing a therapist to help me help guide me through some of those challenges that I'm facing in my life. And so, just as, we do all have mental health, but how we approach it and how we can find ways to support us individually is all very unique, right? I would never say that everyone should go to therapy. I don't believe that. I think therapy, there is value in there, and people can take different pieces and things away from that. But ultimately, gotta find what works for you personally.
Yeah, and like you said, it's our individualism it's important, and we don't all have to get it, but I think the ability to be willing to talk about it is really what we're trying to strive for.
Absolutely. It helps kind of just level that playing field to say that if somebody brings it up in a conversation, everybody else isn't going to just turn their heads and, not try to, stare at the wall and not and sort of ostracize that person, because it is something that it can be hard to bring up in even just in one-on-one conversations with your family or your spouse or your friends, to say, you know what, I'm not feeling so great, or I'm kind of struggling. Those are hard words to say to someone else, even though you're probably feeling them internally. There's a lot that goes on there, not only in your feelings, but also in our brains too. From a neuroscience perspective, there's a lot going on there, that it's not always, like you said, why can't you just stop crying? And it's Well, there's a lot of pieces that are happening there. It's physical, it's psychological, it's neurobiological pieces that are all working together there. There's hormones and chemicals that are in our bodies that are dealing with, those types of stress and are coursing through us. And it's not it's not within our capacity always to be able to pinpoint that and say, okay, I'm going to diagnose myself and heal myself. That's not something that's within our grasp. And that's why we have lots of different resources and access to professionals and things like medications that can help people who do need more help. Some people may never need to access that, but for those that do, it's important that we have those resources available to them.
Yep, completely. So any end goals right now, or just trying to get through the masters right now?
Masters, baby planning,
right.
All those things. No, I definitely set an intention when I started my masters was that I've always wanted to be my own boss, partly because I am the oldest child of 5. I've always had that very strong leadership abilities. And I really feel like having, creating my own business, working with agricultural companies and organizations to build key resources that are specific to agriculture. Like he kind of said, we are a unique industry that has some specific challenges, and not everybody always gets that, I think. And sometimes it can be hard to reach out to a resource that doesn't understand your culture, and you feel a little bit already hesitant to access. So my goal is to really focus on creating resources and supports for wellness and for wellness in the mental health space, and working with farmers and the people in our industry. So however that kind of materializes itself, I'm not 100% sure yet, as if it's, some type of consulting business or I'm running kind of my own private entity. But that's kind of my goal, is to help our people ultimately.
Well, I know on behalf of the industry, we are very happy to have people like you championing for us. So we appreciate it very much.
Thank you. That's very nice. It's good to hear.
Do you have any tips for any farmers that might be listening right now that might be kind of struggling to keep their minds on track right now?
Good question. If I think back to my own personal journey and some of the pieces that I've learned along the way through my schooling so far, ultimately, I think mental health really starts with getting to know yourself really well. And that can kind of be something a little philosophical. I don't know, it's sort of like airy-fairy to kind of throw out there. But ultimately, we spend 100% of our time with ourselves, but I'm not always certain we really understand our feelings and emotions, and kind of getting in touch with that introspective side of our person. And so for me, I always encourage people to start with, taking some time to get to know yourself. And that can be a little bit scary, and it can be a little bit like, okay, well, how do I start to do that? And there's many different ways I think you can kind of tap into that. One being, just having some time alone by yourself, to really just think and feel, and just sort of be in that space, just you. And that can be, give yourself time every day to go for a 10-minute walk by yourself, or, read a book, or, try to find something that's just for you every day, once a day. Doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be a huge commitment, or, something like totally drastically different than what you would do in a normal day. You could try journaling too, just, a 5-minute, jot down your inner thoughts and reflect on those and what that means. It's really quite powerful what you can learn about yourself, I think, when you give yourself some time, because all the rest of the time of the year, come, spring and planting and summer and harvest, we're so busy. Our brains are like always in hyper overdrive, but taking some time to really like slow down and pause and reflect and know that that's okay. It's okay to not always be in that like hyper productive mode, because I think sometimes in agriculture we're always like that sort of striving for productivity is sort of drilled into us as kids. Taking some time to rest and reflect can be really quite powerful. Another piece that I found really useful for myself is reading different books and getting different perspectives on mental health. And one of my most favorite authors and fellow mental health advocate, Brene Brown, is somebody who I have just fallen in love with since I read her first book. And she has some really great insights into like personal development and the psychology around what we do and why we do. There's some really great resources out there that you can tap into if you're curious about learning more about mental health, or just kind of like some of those self-help or self-care type practices. There's podcasts as well that you can listen to and kind of start to feel your way through that journey and that process. Or, the other avenue is, if you don't want to spend too much time with yourself, you can also spend time with your loved ones and like talk about some of these things about, your feelings and your emotions and stuff. If you have somebody in your life that you feel comfortable with talking about that with, whether it's a family member or a friend, or if you're really, kind of looking at it and saying like, I need help. There's also opportunities to go and see a counselor or a therapist to help kind of guide you through some of those avenues as well. And so, yeah, there's many, many different kind of ways we can tap into that. Other things I would say would be kind of some of those self-care practices that if you find yourself, sitting around and your brain is just going haywire, self-care can be very unique to every individual. So whether that is taking time to, in non-COVID pandemic times, go and see hang out with friends, or find a healthy outlet like working out, or journaling, like that can be really kind of cathartic as well for individuals. So it's, I would say start with getting to know yourself a little bit better, and then trying to find some of those healthy outlets for how you want to grow as an individual, what your own personal mental health journey is. Start with that, and then sort of see where that guides you. And there's tons of different resources available out there that you can read about or learn about, things like positive psychology or meditation. Like that's been a part of my own personal journey that I've found a lot of value in, which I will be completely honest, I thought meditation was a little bit frou-frou and off the wall. But the last couple of months, I've really given myself some space to really find a practice that works for me. And I've been able to kind of tap into areas of my own personal mental health journey that have been really healthy for me and cleansing and really rejuvenating. So I would also try to encourage everyone to not write anything off the bat either, because you never know what may help you at the end of the day. And being curious about that and just sort of playing around with it is kind of the fun part. And then when you find something that really clicks and fits with you, follow that and see where it takes you.
That is some terrific advice. And on that note, I think we are out of time. But thank you very much for all your insight, Kristen. It's been wonderful to be able to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Carol, for having me today. It's been great to chat with you too.
And thanks for all of you that tuned into episode 8 of the Successors podcast. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, get a hold of me. I know how it is. Sometimes you're listening to these podcasts and you're of course relating back to your own life and you're going, hey, I think so-and-so would be great on here. Get a hold of me. I'm always open to new ideas. You can do so by sending me a message on Twitter at Kara Oosterhuis or via email at KOOSTERHUIS@realagriculture.com. In the meantime, stay real and thanks for listening to The Successors.